At the age of 61, cartoon illustrator William Stagg took up writing children's picture books. Only 1 year in of publishing his stories, he found his first major success in this new endeavour, being the release of his book Sylvester and the Magic Pebble. It won the 1970 Calder Clock Medal. The main character was a young donkey named Sylvester Duncan. He finds a magical red pebble that can grant wishes. Now you can imagine with an object so powerful that he could set the story into any number of directions, like other wishing stories such as Aladdin and 5 Children in It. So what does Sylvester first wishes for? Well, he's soon chased by a lion, and on the spot and in a panic, he wishes to be a rock. Now, as you can imagine, being an inanimate object trying to grant wishes in that state can be a wee bit tricky, as Sylvester can't reverse the spell. So the rest of the story is spent with Sylvester's parents trying to find him. This is a particular charm to William Stagg's stories, taking a familiar tale and flipping it on its head. 21 years later, a similar looking donkey to Sylvester would appear in another William Stagg story, being a fairy tale but from the monster's perspective. An anti-hero, if you will, having the ability of swallowing lightning bolts, belching flames, and single-handedly taking down a dragon. His grand prize for his adventure is a disgusting princess, where they both live horribly ever after. This was the modern fairy tale story of Shrek, being made well into William Stagg's winter years of his career. This picture book would turn out to be his greatest legacy of his works. Hollywood producer John H. Williams became accustomed to the book, being a particular bedtime favourite with his children. Williams saw potential in the book working as a feature film. After discussing it with his pal Steven Spielberg, they negotiated and purchased the rights of the book, the exchange worth about $500,000. William Stagg additionally provided some notes on what they could possibly do with a Shrek feature film. Now being under the Spielberg umbrella, the project was brought to his animation studio, Amblin Animation, as a possible upcoming feature project, with apparently Bill Murray reported to play Shrek and Steve Martin as Donkey. Amblin Animation was a very short-lived production company, having 3 feature films under its belt. Fievel Goes West, a sequel to An American Tail, We're Back, a dinosaur story based on a book with the same name, and finally Balto, very loosely based on the 1925 Serum Run to the North, with the exception of the first American Tail sequel. The other 2 were not so financially successful theatrically. They did prove to be ever so more popular for when they were released on home media, but that wasn't going to be financially stable for an animation studio on the level of Amblin. The company only lasted in operation for 8 years, before the studio was liquidated. Their next feature project that got the furthest in development was going to be an animated adaptation of the stage musical Cats. It's not entirely known how far Shrek got in its development while it was under Amblin. However, it might have only been at Amblin for a period of 2 to 3 years, as in October 12th of 1994, only 13 months before the release of Amblin's final animated feature film, Spielberg, Katzenberg and Geffen would format a new production company, DreamWorks SKG, and the rights to Shrek came over to the studio, being amongst one of the first movies developed in the animation division. In 1997, when Amblin Animation went defunct, a majority of the employees were relocated to DreamWorks. In the early days of the animation division, Katzenberg wanted to strive for more dramatic and poetic animated features in a similar kin to Lion King. When DreamWorks officially sent Shrek into production, with a crew of 20 employees during its first year of development, it was made in the mindset that it was going to be this grand fantasy adventure. The colour deco was going to be muted and grungy. It was additionally decided that Shrek was going to be a CGI animated feature, although using an interesting hybrid technique. The backgrounds would be live-action miniature sets. The characters would still be rendered in CGI, although they would be animated via the motion capture technique. With Shrek's particular plump body shape, the crew developed the so-called fat capture harness for the motion capture actor to wear during the performance. A test animation was produced lasting less than 40 seconds to see on how it could potentially work. The sequence was loosely inspired by a scene where Shrek is confronted by a mugger. The test scene has been frequently nicknamed over the years I Feel Good, due to Shrek singing the song I Got You during the test. The characters, being Shrek and the Thief, were first physically sculpted and scanned into the computer. The crew made use of morphing technology as a way to aid the characters having animated facial expressions. The initial Shrek CG model was fairly faithful to the book illustrations. However, despite fully approving on the designs and commissioning the animation, executives were beginning to have second thoughts on the whole look and direction of the film. Before the sequence could be fully completed, executives demanded a complete 180 on the whole project, that the art direction and especially Shrek's design had to be completely reworked. The art director, Barry Jackson, who was leading the whole project, didn't get to finish the final lighting rig as intended. Very few of the original 20 crew members would see the project through to completion. The film was gradually going down a more comedic route, when the crew caught on to the idea of turning Shrek into a comedic parody of the fairy tale genre. From there, spinning off the many characters and tropes of the genre, the jokes practically wrote themselves. The other animated movies in development were trying to be something deep and meaningful. Meanwhile, the Shrek project was just in the background, doing its own thing. It was additionally decided to replace the mocap technology with keyframe animation. After a side-by-side comparison, the consent was that the mocap footage just looked like somebody in a fat suit. Two new directors were brought on board, Andrew Addison and Kelly Asbury. Naturally, with the original book only being about 20 pages in length, the story had to be greatly expanded on if it was going to fit a feature-length movie. The plot would have been about a teenage ogre named Shrek, who has been recently kicked out by his parents, due to Shrek not wishing to follow his family's legacy. Instead, he has aspirations of being a knight. He soon finds out that there's a reward from a lord for anyone that can save a princess in the tower. So now Shrek, along with a wisecracking donkey, team together to go on this adventure. Voicing the three main central characters would be comedian actors of the SNL show. The upbeat and bubbly Chris Farley would voice Shrek. The princess, Shrek's love interest, would be voiced by Genevieve Garofalo, being deadpan and sarcastic, a steep contrast to the character of Shrek, and Eddie Murphy being Shrek's buddy Donkey. At the time, the workers of Saturday Night Live would tend to work on the show 6 days a week, a very intense work schedule, so you can imagine that the actors would have to have quite the energy. Chris Farley did have that. He was charismatic and quite the party animal. Tom Cito often recites this story during his animation classes, where he was storyboarding an early scene from Shrek being a presents fair. Shrek comes along to the event, but nobody particularly wants him hanging around. When Shrek gets the hint, he was meant to say, "Hey look, I don't need any little girl from Kansas or a dog to drop a house on me to tell me that I'm not wanted." The line was meant to be delivered quite dry originally. According to Mr. Cito, this is how Farley delivered the line.
Well, I don't need a little girl from Kansas and her little dog to drop a friggin' house on me to tell me I'm not wanted. And he just cracks you up, you know.
Chris Farley couldn't just play it casually, he had to go 100 miles an hour. There was a scene in the original version where Shrek was speaking to his parents while he was eating some grubs in a bowl. Farley requested if he could perhaps eat a bag of M&Ms to help him get into character. An hour into the recording session, Chris Farley went through about 3 M&M bags. From an interview with wordplayer.com, from Shrek's screenwriter Terry Rossio, revealed that Mr. Farley was a very open man. What struck me most seeing Farley work was his willingness to reveal himself, lay himself out bare, over and again for the sake of his performance. That's a form of talent, that's a form of comedy. Farley was known for making deep jokes at his own expense, using it as a coping mechanism to help him through his internal struggles. Development of Shrek had been going on for a span of 18 months. 80 to 95% of Chris Farley's audio had been recorded, with about 15 minutes of animation being completed. In spring of 1997, an assembly cut was presented to the executives. and the project was not received very well. Katzenberg didn't like the look of it, nor found it very funny. Cast and crew who saw the work print at this point couldn't see the film being appealing to a mass audience, with production designer Gamera Retas at best saw the movie having success as a cult film, which the Hollywood executives were not looking to make a movie to find success 20 years down the road. They wanted a crowd pleaser now. The movie drastically needed to be reshaped. Co-director Esprit moved on to be the director of Spirit. A new director needed to be hired on board. That would be Vicky Jensen, just coming off the production of The Road to El Dorado. When previewing the rough cut, she didn't find it nearly as abhorrent. Not good, mind you, but there was something there. She felt that the film really exceeded at its comedic scenes. It was decided to draw back on the adventurous style and focus more on the comedic aspect. The film could be easily saved, it just needed to be reworked. However, it wasn't exactly going to be a quick fix, as an unfortunate event would happen. During the Christmas season of 1997, Chris Farley would pass away due to a drug overdose. He was only age 33. What's tragically ironic that come the new year, Farley had been set on rebounding himself, going completely sober. He was additionally signed on board on starring in the biopic Fatty Arbuckle that the movie itself never truly came to fruition. Since Shrek's personality was one of the same as Chris Farley, it would be virtually impossible to replace him with a voice impersonator. And since he didn't finish all of his lines, and they were already planning to retweak the movie, they couldn't so easily finish off as to what they had set up. So if the Shrek movie was to be completed, they were going to have to start again from scratch. Eventually, a replacement for Shrek was found in Chris Farley's good old pal Mike Myers. In the early days, Mr. Myers was trying to imitate Shrek's character to be quite similar to Chris Farley, but Mike Myers felt that it was the wrong direction of himself essentially gatecrashing a Chris Farley movie. So after talking to the filmmakers, they reworked the whole film yet again to pay less influence from Chris Farley. Since now Mike Myers' Shrek was much more deadpan in his delivery, that personality originally reserved for the princess was not going to contrast well. Genevieve Garofalo would additionally be recast, with Cameron Diaz filling the shoes of Princess Fiona, now being good spirit and bubbly, balancing out Shrek's rather grouchy attitude. Eddie Murphy was still kept on board to play Donkey. A greater emphasis was pushed on this version of Shrek of deconstructing the classic fairy tale stories, such as finding your lover in the last place you would expect, not being ashamed of one's imperfections, the princess not being quite royally reserved, Beauty becoming the ogre for a lover, and to top it all off, Shrek using the storybook to wipe his place where the sun don't shine. Shrek saw a release in the summer of 2001, spending 6 years in development at DreamWorks. And as we all know by now, Shrek made motion picture history. It completely changed the following directions for other animated DreamWorks movies, which in terms of competition gave Disney a run for their money, and of course spawned a franchise and countless memes. Original Shrek author William Stagg was 93 at the time of the movie's release. According to his estate, this is what he thought of the movie. It's vulgar, it's disgusting, and I love it. And while alas he never got to see Shrek 2 since he passed away in 2003, by the time of the sequel's release, combining the box office earnings of the first movie, in total they both made well over $1 billion, making William Stagg the first sole individual of creating a billion-dollar animated franchise, by just solely selling cinema tickets alone. So not a bad note to end on really. Well done, Will. And there we have it. That is the end of the story. Or is it? During the 2010s and early 2020s, there's been a hyperfixation on the subject of missing media, projects that became either lost over the years or just merely inaccessible to the public. Additionally, round about at the same time, the internet community took a particular peak interest with the Shrek franchise. There was certainly a gradual audience growing who wanted to know more about the early versions of Shrek, and with the Chris Farley rendition being largely inaccessible to view, and the rare amount of times that it's been officially acknowledged by DreamWorks, that alone was only going to fuel the lost media community into seeking out if there was anything more to see. The fixation from this particular topic within the community gradually made it one of the most desired pieces of missing media. taking a look on what DreamWorks has officially released on their end. When Shrek came to DVD on November 2nd of 2001, the bonus content featured a special 22-minute featurette of the making of the film, despite the movie having a lengthy 11-year period of development. It only focuses on the final development with Mike Myers, giving zero indications of the prior Mike Myers versions. However, 12 minutes and 28 seconds into the documentary, there's a graphic designer adding texturing to a CG model. If you take a glance at the Shrek artwork on the wall, you can see that it's the early Chris Farley Shrek rendition, and taking a look at the computer model on screen, while it is rather obscured, there are specific facial details that can be matched up to the Chris Farley design. This is quite clearly a behind the scenes clip for the 1995 CGI test. The documentary never acknowledges this, and has probably purposely been edited to be quite obscured, so it can fit alongside the rest of the Mike Myers footage, without the need of viewers raising an eyebrow as to why does the Shrek design look different from the Mike Myers version. In 2007, a book was published about the Shrek's franchise artwork, where there were 4 pages providing detail and imagery of the pre-Mike Myers Shrek. In the early 2010s, the BBC made a documentary about the Shrek series, titling it Shrek Once Upon a Time, interviewing the cast and crew of the films, with the documentary even acknowledging Chris Farley's involvement. Unfortunately, at the moment, the BBC documentary is lost media itself, so we don't have the luxury of knowing any finer details of what exactly the documentary touches on. However, from the recollection of viewers, the documentary didn't provide any new content from the pre-Mike Myers version. Instead, to represent this early version of Shrek, it utilised archival recordings of Chris Farley's comedy sketches. In 2015, DreamWorks developer John Garbett uploaded the original version of the campfire scene from Shrek. This little moment touches on Shrek's parental issues.
Someone hurt you many years ago.
Leave my parents out of this!
Breakthrough! Let's go with that. Let's explore family origin. Were you hugged as a child, Shrek?
All right.
A subplot that was completely removed in the final Mike Myers version. As of 2023, it's the only full scene we have of Chris Farley.
People see me and they go, "Ah! A big, stupid, stinky, smelly, ugly ogre! I'm so scared!" And they judge me before they even know me.
The only 2 scenes that both the Chris Farley and Mike Myers versions share in common is both this campfire scene and the onion scene.
Ogres are like onions.
They stink?
Yes. No.
Originally, this video was uploaded to John Garbett's Vimeo account, before it was later re-uploaded onto YouTube. And in 2022, DreamWorks on Twitter tweeted out this, "From the swamp to the screen," showing a side-by-side comparison of conceptual artwork done of the onion scene. As you can see in the original artwork, Shrek is sporting some ginger hair, reminiscent from the same hair of Chris Farley. And as of 2023, all the examples I've listed has been the only times that DreamWorks have officially released anything of the pre-Mike Myers Shrek in any capacity. So if anything more was going to be found of this version of Shrek, then it was going to be up to lost media seekers to externally find sources outside of the current DreamWorks umbrella. During the 2010s, there was an eBay listing for the original Shrek maquette model that was used and scanned for the feel-good test scene. The listing featured screenshots from the actual test. These were the first images of the feel-good test scene made publicly available. This certainly whet the appetite to find more material from the feel-good test and other assets of the Chris Farley version. On the auction site of WorthPoint, there was various listings of conceptual and storyboard artwork from the 90s rendition of Shrek. A storyboard sequence of Shrek being confronted by a mugger was reconstructed by an online YouTuber under the username Uncle Sporksums, relying purely on the images of the auction listing. And since they were never scanned for the online platform, the images do vary in quality throughout the duration of the video. The final length is about 2 minutes and 28 seconds. For the next 6 years, this would be the most completed rendition of the feel-good scene that could be publicly watched. Most enticing out of all the listings was a VHS tape comprising of 5 minutes of content of the short-lived computer animation division Propeller Head. Contained on the tape was the very test sequence of the first CG model of Shrek. The description gave a lot of insight of the precise details of what happens in the test. It was explained that it was merely a 45-second sequence, a condensed version of the feel-good scripted scene. It was noted that the clip had no audio, but you could lip-read Shrek saying at the end, "Bite me." So if it was to ever resurface for the public, then we still wouldn't get any additional new audio clips from Chris Farley, presuming they were ever used for this early test. This was the most amount of info revealed about the feel-good test up until this point. The tape was eventually sold for an unknown sum. The individual who bought it has never came forward, making this lead a dead end. By 2021 and 2022, several online YouTube documentaries were made discussing about the topic of the lost Chris Farley version. By July 20th of 22, an online Twitter user under the handle of DoofusManBoy would watch all the online videos about the topic. Intrigued of the early version of Shrek, he filtered through the names of the end credits of Shrek to see if any of them had an online presence, and if so, did they had any early pre-production Shrek stuff? Well, short answer, yes. Throughout that summer, new Shrek goodies would be unearthed. These include 2 animation test sequences with Donkey. In one of the tests, it used a CG model that was being used for the production of Spirit. Here we can hear unused audio from Eddie Murphy.
I'm free! I'm free! I can't believe it! Thank you so much. You don't know what you've done for me.
He additionally reached out to the storyboard artist Ken Harsher, where on his old website he used to have a storyboard sequence of Shrek from the late 90s. The video was unplayable on the site for some years, but Mr. Harsher was nice enough to send him a copy, which would later be re-uploaded on DoofusManBoy's YouTube channel. He then found on Corey James's social media platforms that he had uploaded early animation test renders of Shrek, one of them even containing brand new Chris Farley audio dialogue that had never been heard before by the public.
No! I'm an ogre! Doesn't that bother you at all?
Nope.
Really?
Really?
He then found on the Vimeo account of Anders JL that in one of the demo reels at the very beginning in the corner, that you could see the high quality sped up animation from the feel good test. This had been the closest anybody had seen the test footage up until now. DoofusManBoy was extremely ecstatic over this revelation, so hurriedly made an LMW account and joined the Discord server, informing all in the community his findings. DoofusManBoy and the LMW moderators took the decision by this time to not share the name of the animators' portfolios that they had found, in fear that there may be a mass amount of people that would overwhelmingly ask for more Shrek content that may deter the veteran artist to reveal any more. Now, I'm sure those who did track down the names and did ask the animators did it without any malicious intent, but generally it's for the best for just one person to ask, rather than an overwhelming 50 individuals. But then, by August, a Reddit user under the handle AccomplishedWorld823 would find that a small snippet of the feel-good test footage of Shrek had actually been online for the past 12 years. In 2010, a YouTube channel by the name of Smoden would upload a demo reel containing 5 seconds of the feel-good test. As well, Soman had a Vimeo account containing an additional 5 seconds of the feel-good test, altogether combining about 10 seconds worth of content. There was a huge recession on the internet over these discoveries. That summer was pure Shrek season. But with college starting back up soon, DoofusManBoy took a break from the search, and things on the Shrek scene was relatively chilled for a bit. Until on November 24th of 2023, Barry Jackson, Shrek's original art director, posted to the internet the infamous I Feel Good test. Mr. Jackson had many inquiries about the test on his Instagram account, but didn't really think anything of it. He had the test digitized 10 years earlier, and when he finally decided to post it to the internet, he actually struggled trying to relocate that digital file. Finally, he was able to dig it up and post it onto his YouTube account. Within just under a week, the video gained 1 million views. 2 days later, another video would be posted, that being an 11-minute interview, where Barry Jackson got to give his perspective on the whole situation. And also, not to sound too ungrateful, there is still a higher quality version of the feel-good test scene that does exist, and unfortunately, Mr. Jackson didn't have a copy of it. So the hunt is still on to try and find that beautiful Shrek face smile in HD. Even long before the test reel was finally found, through the ongoing research and perseverance by amateurs and enthusiasts, we already knew quite a fair bit of the final animation. We already knew that it wasn't going to be a fairly long piece, with the final test only clocking in just under 40 seconds. That, and it wasn't going to feature any new additional audio from Chris Farley. And while I'm certainly grateful that we finally have the test to see, for me the most insightful thing that we got out of anything of this particular search is hearing the story from Barry Jackson, Shrek's original art director, as his interview provides more details that weren't previously known about. So here's a timeline on how we currently understand the development of Shrek. When it came to be worked under the DreamWorks umbrella, this CG test was more in line for a much more darker comedy of Shrek, before it would be shifted and reworked to be a comedy adventure, which for Chris Farley's involvement was the one that got the furthest in development. Then when Mr. Farley passed away, the film was reworked yet again to be far less adventurous, to instead be far more comedic, and this was the final Mike Myers version that we got to see. Even though that right now we may have finally found the feel-good test, it's merely just the tip of the iceberg. There's still far more to discover from the undeveloped versions of Shrek. For example, we still don't have any early drafts of the Shrek films, so we still don't precisely know the exact mechanics and plot beats, and how truly different the early Shreks were from the final Mike Myers film. For example, there was a witch in the original book who sent Shrek on his adventure, and she was meant to appear in the Chris Farley version with her twin, but of course there's no such witch in the final Shrek film, and we still don't have the luxury of listening to all of Chris Farley's audio. But there is a chance that that might change in the near future. Now, before I go any further, just take this with a pinch of salt. According to some fellow colleagues of mine who were in the script trading and work prints community, that there's a Chris Farley Shrek work print circulating, with roughly 15 minutes of completed CGI animation. The work print additionally includes the campfire scene that did get as far as being fully animated. These former colleagues of mine have provided me with rare stuff in the past, so I certainly couldn't see them lying about something like this. But it undeniably does sound too good to be true. Anyway, at the moment, that Shrek work print has been out of reach, and there hasn't been a trace of any new leads to follow up on. At the very least, one day, something will surely come to light of more Shrek content.